Alright, this is Nick at North Central Illinois Custom Kydex. I'm just going to make a quick video for a guy on one of the FN Facebook pages here on removing the striker and plunger from the FNS compact. So I unloaded it because this is my carry gun. So we don't need the frame at all. Here's the slide. You're probably somewhat familiar, right? Spring, barrel, we don't need that for this. Alright, so when you look here at the, try to get some light, at the slide, so here's the tang off the striker, here's the plunger. Way back here, let me get some more light. Alright, so too much light. There we go. If you look back here, you can see this little black plastic disc right at the very end of the red spring. So all you need to do is use a tool like a small screwdriver, flat screwdriver, or like a pick, or really anything that you can reach in there with. And you need to compress the spring, so you got to get back here in that notch and push the spring forward towards the muzzle. When you do that, it will take the pressure off of the back plate here and allow the back plate to slide up. Once the back plate is removed, then slowly release the pressure on that spring, because everything is just going to come out the back side. So I'm going to try to do this here in a way that maybe you'll be able to see. So if this phone falls over, I apologize. I'll try to fix it, but anyway. Alright, so let me see if I can angle that just a bit more. Alright, so I'm going to try to do this in frame. Hopefully you're able to see. So here's that the little disc there that I said. You see the notch between the back plate. So here's the back plate, here's the disc, there's a little notch in between. So all you do is put your tool that you're using in that notch and then pull towards the muzzle, okay? See that? Get the tool in the notch, pull towards the muzzle. Then you can slide the whole tool down once you get the disc forward a little bit. But you got to keep that pressure forward to keep the spring compressed. And then here's the end plate. It will just come right out. Put your finger over where the end plate was. Take your tool out, and now here you can just slowly let the pressure off the spring. Otherwise, it will go shooting out. I mean, it's compressed in there. So here's your spring and your little spring guide. These things don't matter. You're not doing anything with those, so just set those to the side. Now, to get the striker out, you have to manipulate the plunger. There's a set process for it. I never remember what it is, so I just play with it till it comes out. So the plunger is holding the striker in. If you push the plunger down, the striker moves to the rear, and then you can see now the plunger, or the striker, is out. Here's the striker, the skeletonized striker in the compact, and then here's the plunger. Now that the striker's out, the plunger is just free. There is a little spring under the plunger, so don't lose that. Alright, so here's what you do to fix some of that grittiness. This rim here, that the spring, the red spring, goes through, on a lot of the FNSs that I've had, the grittiness is actually, as you're pressing the trigger and the take up, you're compressing the spring. And the grittiness is actually the spring rubbing on the very edge here or inside of the striker. So to fix that, I just did this on my 509 2 days ago, so I got all my stuff sitting out here still. So I use this little diamond needle file and bevel this edge. On my compact, it didn't need it. The edge is like already beveled beautifully from the factory. You know, manufacturing processes day to day and part to part can vary, but this one was already beveled quite well. So I didn't need to do that on mine, but it sounds like you probably do on yours. So if there's a burr or a ridge there, what happens is as you press the trigger through that take up, you can actually feel it riding over each coil as that spring compresses, and that's what gives you that grittiness, or that's one possible thing. Okay, so once you have the needle file and you've successfully beveled this edge, the best way that I found to actually polish the inside of this is to take Q-tips, cut them down. I use a Dremel. You can basically chock the Q-tip in the Dremel, just like this. All right, now these are little plastic tube Q-tips, so they're not very durable. They don't last that long. And then I like to use flits. I know it's backwards here in the camera, but put a little bit on there. I rub it in a little bit because I found if you don't, it goes flying everywhere as soon as you turn the Dremel on. All right, move the sled out of the way. So now you basically take your polish on your Q-tip, put it in the striker, and then turn your Dremel on. And then just slight pressure around. What that's doing is it's polishing. I've never polished this one because when I got this, it was smooth and had no grit, but I'm showing you here, like, it's polishing the inside of that channel where that spring runs. All right, then you just clean it up and you're probably good there. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time polishing this because, like I said, mine here probably doesn't really need it, but anytime you have metal touching metal and it moves and you polish it, it's going to be better. Will you have the striker out? I neglected to tell you one thing. In the striker, there's this little pin here, and it will fall out, and then there's a little tiny piece inside of here that will fall out once that pin's out. So either remove it and safely set it aside, or keep a finger on it so it doesn't fall out, because if you lose that, you're probably going to be in rough shape until you buy a new one. Anyway, I'm just going to use clean Q-tips and kind of clean the polish off here. And then I was also going to say, when you have the striker out, you can try to polish like the front edge here of the tang. You know, you put a little polish on there, rub it with the Q-tip. I mean, you can go nuts with the Dremel if you want. I don't really advise people do that because I don't know everybody's skill level, and you don't really want to take too much material off or change the shape or angle of everything, because you may cause safety problems if you do that. But I polish that. The other thing that you can polish is you can see the rim here. That's actually right here, this ring and then this ring are what touch inside the striker channel, inside the slide when the striker moves back and forth. And remember, when you're pressing the trigger, that first take up, it's doing two things. It's pushing the striker back, which is compressing this red spring in here. That's usually where your grittiness comes from. The other thing that's happening is in the frame, this little finger here on the sear carrier, it's pushing the plunger up to remove the drop safety, basically. So if you are handy and you want to, you can try to polish this little notch in here where the sorry, I'm holding it wrong, holding it so I can see it, not so you can see it. This area in here, you can try to polish that like with the soft cloth wheel like this. You know, again, you're not trying to take off any material or change any geometry, you're just trying to polish it so it's smooth. If you polish that, then what you may find is that get this oriented right, this unlocking here is smoother, or where the sear is going to ride on the plunger here. So that may help you. The other places that you want to polish, since you have everything apart, you might as well do it. This surface here, especially the leading surface of the plunger. So that's a metal on metal. As you're pressing the trigger, you're dragging that metal finger on the sear carrier against this to push it up. So this surface is metal scraping against metal, so polishing that is always a good idea. The other thing is make sure that there's no burrs anywhere on the outside of the plunger, because it's pushing up into the channel here, and if there's a burr on here, you're going to feel that as a gritty trigger. Then the final thing, and maybe the hardest thing, is to examine the channel here, the channel here that the plunger rides in, and make sure that there's no burrs in there. If there's any burrs in there, then you're going to feel that drag, and you're going to say, hey, my trigger's gritty. If there is a burr in there, the best way I found to find is I just look in there real good with a light. And if there's a burr, especially since you've got 500 rounds through your gun, if there's a burr, it's going to show up as a shiny spot because it's been metal rubbing against metal every time that trigger's been cycled. So if you see a shiny spot in there, you have to figure out the geometry and the angles of how you can get a little file or something in there to try to clean that up. And then once you have that cleaned up, you can go back and use your Q-tips and your polish, and in the Dremel or by hand. You can rub the polish in there, rub it around, like so, and then use clean Q-tips and keep going. Keep using clean Q-tip after clean Q-tip until you get all the polish out. You don't really want any residual polish left in there. On some of the coated slides, I haven't seen so much of an issue with the black ones, but maybe on your FDE one, you might consider also trying to polish the inside, the channel here that the sear rides in, because of the coating might be causing some issues there as the striker moves back and forth in that channel. That needs to be nice and smooth. Just get that there we go. Okay. Oh, there is a little tiny spring. When you put this back together, take that spring out so that you can get it lined up right on the striker. But here what I'm showing you is I've got the striker in here and I'm moving it back and forth, and I'm feeling, okay, it feels smooth, it's not catching or really dragging on anything so much. Like I said, my compact brand new was 5.5 pounds, and it was the smoothest FNS trigger I had felt, and I had owned 3 prior to this one and shot some other ones, and had other ones in gun shops and things like that. So I've been happy with my compact. I thought they really figured the trigger out until I got my 509, and I was like, nope, that's that FNS trigger. I know exactly where the spots are that I need to clean up, and as soon as I polished the inside of the striker and the plunger on my 509, all of the grittiness and the take-up was gone. Okay, so you got everything polished, cleaned up. Don't dump a ton of oil in there. You don't want to do that. I like to use this Hornady product. It's an aerosol, but then it's a dry lube, so you really can just spray everything down, all the springs, the striker. You can use this kind of as a barrel blaster. You can hose it in that channel to make sure you got all of the polish out, and then just let everything kind of drip dry off or whatever. This stuff evaporates off in just a couple of minutes, and it leaves a nice thin film on everything, so everything's lubricated, but it doesn't have wet oil on it. So if you have an air compressor, you can accelerate the drying process or whatever. I mean, when you put it back together wet, it will dry within a matter of minutes. So putting this back together, striker, if you took that pin and the little cup inside of here out, put it back together. It can be a little tricky, but you'll figure it out. If you can't, let me know and I can give you post a picture of like the exploded diagram. All right, so then you take your little striker return spring, set it on the striker, line everything up carefully in this striker channel. Oh, there, what do you know, my pin fell out. Pin decided to fall out at the last minute. So here's that little tiny pin. All right, you just got to get the holes in the striker and the little cup in there lined up. and that's that. So put the spring back on the striker. Wish I had a top-down camera, you could see this better. So I'm just lining up. Yep, see that? Can't do things sideways. Alright, ease that back in there. You can't put the striker in all the way. Once that little big cutout rectangular spot in the striker is in line with the plunger channel, take your spring for your plunger. Another little trick that people do is they'll take this spring for the plunger and they'll cut 3 or 4 coils off of it. That makes the spring pressure lighter so that the plunger pushes up easier, so then it takes a little bit of resistance out of the trigger. Now you are potentially compromising a safety then, because this plunger is a safety. But on the back side of the plunger here, you got that little groove. The spring sits in there. You can hold it there with one hand and then set it down into the channel. So the spring is on the outside towards the side of the slide, and then on the inside, that's where the plunger is. So then you push this down and then push the striker forward, and then that locks in. Okay, good. Take your red spring, slide it into the striker, take the striker spring guide, slide it into the red spring. Now, you know, rub your belly and pat your stomach at the same time. You got to take a finger, like your index finger here, compress the plunger, or compress the striker spring so it's all the way in, and then take your end plate and slide it back in the notch. Now it's all back together. All right, so now you can kind of check your work, and before you take this apart, you should do this check, and then after you take it apart, you can do this check and see if you made any difference. The first thing that I do is I'll just use the little end of my Dremel bit here because it's smooth and won't scratch anything. Push the plunger up and down. This should travel freely, okay, and it should be relatively smooth. Like, you shouldn't be feeling drag in there, okay? If you feel drag in there, it amplifies through the trigger, and then that's one of the things that can cause grittiness in the trigger. So that's why we deburred that channel, polish that channel, polish the plunger, all those things. The next thing to do is take the little tang on the bottom of the striker here, pull it to the rear. Okay, so once it's pulled to the rear and the plunger clicks into place, then realize that this is how the system is set up when it's ready to fire. And when you start pulling the trigger, you're actually pulling this striker back farther. All right, so from this position, pull the striker back. If you can feel like a click, chunk, 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 chunk as you do that, that's an indication that there's some interference between the spring and the inside of the striker. So before you take it apart and do anything, you can do that test, and you'll probably feel like some crunch, crunch, crunch there, and that's probably where your grittiness is coming from. After you clean it up, deburr it, polish it, do all those things, put it back together, this should feel much smoother. Okay, well, my slide is back assembled, so I'll take my frame. One other thing, the little portion here that we talked about, the finger on the sear carrier that pushes on the plunger, you can polish that as well. There's other parts and things in here, so if you're not going to take the frame apart, just be a little careful of what you're jamming in there. If you're trying to use files or sandpaper or anything like that, I find typically just using like a felt wheel on the Dremel carefully, because you don't want to get down onto the slide, or the frame rail rather, and then you can use your soft wheel, and basically you're just trying to take any tooling marks out so it's smooth. All right, we'll put this back together, and well, you know what I better do? Better put your barrel and recoil spring back in. It's been a long day. I said this would be a quick video. It's probably 20 minutes already, but I hope it's helpful. All right, so now this is back together, and I know you can't tell on video, but this take up, I mean, there's really no grit. There's one little bit maybe right here, but I've not really ever done anything with this gun except shoot it. I don't have my long slide down here, but that thing is butter. I gutted the whole frame, I polished everything, and that thing has absolutely no, I mean, the take-up doesn't even feel like you're doing anything. It just goes right back to the break point. But here's my trigger pull gauge on my compact, so it's zeroed out. And yeah, I don't have a fancy digital one, but this one works. So when you pull this and you get the brake, again, this is going to be backwards, but figure out the number, right? It's 5 pounds. Mine was 5.5 new. All I really did was shoot it and polish the plunger. I didn't really ever do anything with the strike or anything like that. And it's 5 pounds. And it's nice and crisp and easy. There's no like little double pickup or take up or break or anything like that. So I'm happy with mine. I hope some of those things might help you identify maybe an issue with yours and get it cleaned up, because I think that, you know, once you have that done and the trigger's cleaned up a little bit, you'll be really happy with the pistol. So if you have any other questions, message me, or, you know, leave a reply comment on this discussion or whatever. Thanks a lot. I hope that helped.